So good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank the conference for inviting me to speak on a topic that I have experience in from a couple of different perspectives. One is I have been a founder of a company who has taken therapies and devices through accelerated pathways, taken those companies public, and also I'm an investor in technologies and what I would look for in new technologies that are looking for seed money. I do have some disclosures, basically what I just told you, that I do invest in companies and I have founded them as well. Accelerated approval pathways. It's probably not a very good term because acceleration typically means go faster and get to the end result quicker. Most accelerated pathways, and I'm going to show you this, don't actually achieve that objective. So accelerated pathways can achieve different objectives depending upon what your goals are as an organization and what your drug or your therapy is targeted towards. But I kind of like to equate designing your process map or your business model to these two bridges. And one of them, which is pretty rickety, and one that I hear pitched a lot, is the accelerated pathway bridge, which lays down a couple of planks to get from one side to the other, not very robust, not well thought out, and doesn't align with the key stakeholders that are intending to bring a new drug or therapy to market and invest in it and get a return. What is expected is actually the bridge in the bottom, which is a fully laid out wide bridge that can move as much therapeutic product from one side to the other to meet as many patients' needs as is possible. And we have to find a way of trying to bridge those, so to speak, those goals. I'm going to talk today a little bit about what accelerated pathways exist for you to take advantage of, as well as the advantages and disadvantages of each of them. And I think depending upon where you are, I'm assuming most of us are not large pharma in here, so we can take some of them that are really advantageous to large pharma off the table for discussion. And then wrap up with a couple of case studies that I've been involved with and why I think that their approach has made sense for where they were in their process map, and then wrap up with sort of my recommendations. So what's the background of accelerated pathways? Well, it started out about 25 years ago being patient-driven, with the ACT UP organization demanding access to AIDS drugs because life expectancy, if you were full-blown AIDS at that point, was about 6 months to a year. You didn't have time for a 10-year product development life cycle of a new drug. So the ACT UP organization really pushed Congress and the US FDA to reinvent themselves to address their urgent needs. And out of that came the theory that accelerated pathways would achieve those objectives. What accelerated pathways have migrated to, though, and their goal, as written below, is really focused on unmet medical need, small patient population or rare diseases that are debilitating or life-threatening. So a lot of boxes you need to check to even get on an accelerated pathway. What it's ended up in, and this is purely my opinion, but is somewhat of an untenable position for the government to be in, even in this coupon exchanging program, where if we make an investment as an organization, and this was primarily focused on big pharma, if they would start to focus on rare diseases or unmet medical needs, in exchange for making that investment, the US government or the FDA would give them a get-out-of-jail card or a free pass card to put them at the front of the line on their next drug. Well, that all sounded great. You would get in line, you think, okay, maybe I'll focus on some of the unmet medical needs to get that. What it's turned out to be is that those coupons can be worth up to $100 million. They're sold in the open market like a share of stock, and they're transacted in a way that the government never intended them to be. So I think where we are today, we really have to step back as a society and as regulators and rethink what accelerated pathways have done. And for this particular space, Congress has in front of them new legislation called the ReGrow Act that the House has one bill, Senate has another bill, and I think they are very promising to really reshape accelerated pathways for regenerative medicine. And if those can get passed, and we're hoping that the lame duck Congress will actually take it up, I was in part of the lobbying to even get it into Congress, then we may be able to have a bill before this Congress gets replaced. If not, hopefully next year, but President Obama has promised to sign it, and I'm assuming that either one of the new presidential candidates will as well. So who are really the stakeholders when you think about an accelerated pathway? An accelerated pathway, again, is trying to get the drug onto the market faster. Well, you have patients and physicians that were really the genesis of this. They wanted therapies. They were either afflicted from the disease or the physicians wanted to provide it to them. And so their goals are pretty pure. They just want a therapy. Once you move outside of the patient and caregiver side of it, the purity starts to change a little bit. And we have the regulators who are philosophically and statutorily driven towards providing paths to bring therapies to market that are safe and effective and reliable. So whether it's for a device or a therapeutic or a diagnostic, they have very rigorous programs that they have designed over, a 40 or 50 year time frame to say, if this comes out and it has this regulatory stamp on it, you can expect that it's going to be effective, or it's going to be predictive, or it's going to be valid. And they've stuck with that mantra. The issue we face in rare diseases and unmet medical needs is that patient populations are small, they're very mixed, their pathologies are not very similar, and even designing clinical trials can be troubling because you may not get a large enough similar patient pool to draw any statistical analysis out of it. And so reframing that, although the regulatory agencies I have found in my experience are pretty flexible in trying to help you achieve those goals, the fact is the boxes are there, they have to be checked, and the regulations are regulations. And getting around those, it just won't happen. So the regulators really have sort of pulled back a little bit on what accelerated pathways can give us, and I'll show you in a moment in the data. They don't give us a lot of advanced approvals. And then there's industry, and the industry's goals really are to make money. They want to get their drug onto the market and get as much out of it as fast as they can. That's free capital or capital markets, and it's fun and exciting, and I think they drive innovation actually. But the difficult part is the payers. Who actually is going to pay for a drug? And I'll give you a couple of new data points. Yesterday, Aetna decided to withdraw from the Affordable Care Act. We have really in the US a very challenging payer program. You have CMS, which is Medicare, Medicaid, which is mandated to pay for any therapy that is approved by the FDA, but private payers are not. And they have a lot of rigorous processes before they will decide to reimburse for a therapy. So if you're not on Medicaid or you're not retired, you're going to be in a private payer program, and whether you're in a rare disease or not, the likelihood of getting reimbursed for these very expensive therapies is pretty minimal and very daunting. And so I will show you that accelerated pathways do not benefit payers. And as you saw, I think earlier today, some of the cost of these new regenerative therapies being on the upward side of even $1 million, good luck getting reimbursed for that. And they know they simply can run out the clock. Because today, the average American is on a private payer program for 12 months, and they switch companies. So if I can hold off paying for your therapy until you're off of my program, I've saved my corporation money, and that's their goals. So one payer that I think has a phenomenal model, and I think you should look at if you're developing technologies, is Kaiser Permanente. The average patient that is on their program is a decade. They really have their technology-based committees now that look at new technologies that actually can make patients better and reduce their overall healthcare costs, and they're less about the premium for that 12-month period. and the return on investment of that premium than they are for the 10-year time period, and so your horizon really opens up. And so I think Kaiser's doing a lot of things very, very well today, and may even become one of the basic science investors of the future, because they know that good health care, wellness is much better than sick care. So I've talked a little bit about who are the stakeholders, but who are really the key influencers or the decision makers? Well, I say there are three kings and an ace on the table at all times in bringing a drug to market. The ace is always funding. So the funders, whether they happen to be a grant organization or venture capital, Wall Street, et cetera, they will have a significant influence in what you do with the development program that you want to pursue. And so I think at the end of the day, they say yes or no. What I would advise everyone to do is take your investor's word, understand it, and try to implement it as much as you can, but also don't take the advice of people that don't invest in you. So when you're out pitching to get money, everyone has their opinion of what you should do, and everyone probably has a different opinion. Listen to the people that actually pony up the bucks and want to take you forward, and I think you'll do better. The three kings, though, are the payers in the US. CMS is really king here. You have to get a CMS program in place for the Medicare payment program, and they have very active outreach programs that you need to be involved with really after the end of your phase 1 study. You need to get to CMS immediately and have them tell you what they will pay for and what they will not. Their goals are different than FDA's, and CMS has these active programs, and you should engage them through their legal process right up front. If you're looking at Europe, that is a spaghetti bowl of challenge. There are 26 reimbursement committees regionally that will make a decision whether you will get paid for, even if you get EMEA approval for your drug. These 26 different disparate organizations will make a decision whether they're going to pay you or reimburse you for it. And there are a lot of thresholds you have to overcome, including superiority, quality of life, cost of quality, all of those sort of things. Health regulators I've talked about. I'll get into that a little bit more, but even in the US, there are always turf battles between the different divisions within FDA and where you ultimately fall. I think it's pretty clear now today that if you're in a biological regenerative medicine program or a device that is intended for regenerative medicine, you fall within CBER's domain, and so CBER is going to be the one that you will be working with. And CBER is pretty new to some of the areas of approvals, including devices. So working with them, I found them to be a great agency, but they don't have the experience that CDER does. And then finally, on the clinician side, you need to engage your clinicians very, very early and start to build your supporters, because ultimately in the US, those clinicians are going to have to go back to a RUC committee with the AMA to write a recommendation to Medicare to say, yes, we need this drug, this is why we need it, and this is what the data says. And instead of paying 80 cents on the dollar that the company is requesting, you should pay $1.10. So, and in Europe, UK, you have NICE, et cetera. These committees really set the guidelines of not only do you get reimbursed, but how much you get reimbursed. What programs are available for accelerated? Well, there's fast track, there's breakthrough, and you've heard some of these bantered around over the last 2 days, orphan drug, priority review, brand new one, the expedited access pathway, which I'm most excited about. And we don't have a lot of data in for that yet because it is brand new and it's focused on the device. It is basically a breakthrough therapy equivalent on the device side. And I think you can already start to see that they're making big strides to get new devices to the market quickly. The also new program that came in with the Affordable Care Act is the IDE reimbursement. And this is if you are a device, You can go to Medicare in your phase 3 or your pivotal trial, and they will pay the patient costs and the device costs for that trial. This is worth millions and millions of dollars. So it's a new funding source, but what you have to do is engage CMS upfront with your clinical trial design. Many times they will want a different clinical trial design than FDA, and you have to negotiate between those two agencies for the final clinical trial design to meet both of their goals. My recommendation is listen very, very closely to CMS, because if you ever want to get your return, you need to be reimbursed for it. And so what they tell you they'll pay for puts them probably between the ace and the king of importance. Overseas, some more interesting things are happening than in the US on accelerated pathways. Europe has just introduced Prime 2016, which I think we hope will really reconfigure how they approach unmet medical needs. And the adaptive pathway pilot program, which I'm a big believer in adaptive trial designs, because it's very difficult to get a single trial to fit all needs. And when you have these rare diseases or small populations of patients, you may not get enough patients in a single trial that will give you statistical significance. So what do you need to do? You need to learn from your first few patients and redesign your trial with FDA in mind or the EMEA. And adaptive trial designs, I'm very supportive of. But the country that's actually leading on the most innovation is Japan. And in their front runner program, which is codified, it's not just a rule, it's actually gone through the DIET, is that they will take phase 1 data for regenerative medicine products. They will evaluate the phase 1 and they will design a phase 2 with you. And you get sort of temporary marketing approval while you're doing the phase 2, and then to come out on the other side of whatever the phase 2 shows. Japan, very aggressive, and I've known multiple companies now that have gone there to get on these fast tracks. It's a pretty simple process now. It didn't used to be to work in Japan, but they've really streamlined it. And I would say, as a small company in the US, you need to be thinking of Japan as one of your top, probably 1 or 2 priorities to get there quickly, because you can get clinical evidence and you can get paid for it. So it's a good place to go. The only downside to Japan is that it's a homogenous society, so not genetically diverse, and some of that data will be challenging if you want to bring it back into the US to use it. Looking at the timelines, well, we've all seen these timelines. We know what they are. They're typically about 10 years to get a drug or a biologic to the market. Multiple phases that you need to be planning. One of the things I look for in companies is how robust is their future plan? Do they understand what's going to be involved? In biologics in particular, under-planning on your manufacturing side or under-planning on your reimbursement side is probably going to raise issues for funding today, because most fund firms are very smart in the challenges they've learned by being burned, and what happens when these organizations that have great science and maybe even great animal data, and they sail through their phase 1, they get into phase 2, and the regulations change. Now you've got to start having things like GMP and plans in place, and they have no processes for that. And what they end up finding out is that you have a long delay to put it in place and a $50 million price tag to build it in, or you need to go to a contract manufacturer. So accelerated pathways don't help you with those roadmaps. One is a business plan and one is a regulatory path. And so at the end of the day, if you have a biological, even if you're on an accelerated pathway, because of these other elements in your plan, it can be challenging to shorten that cycle much shorter than the 10-year time frame. I'll show you some data that will show that it actually does happen. But a lot of companies are choosing to try an accelerated pathway, but the data also shows that they're not getting to market any faster than a standard pathway. And I'll show you the breakthrough therapy. 441 applications have been submitted to the FDA thus far for breakthrough therapy. Only 145 of those applications have been granted. And 52, as of now, are actually approved therapies. So that is sort of a cold bath that you go through to think, oh, I got breakthrough therapy, my shareholders and my investors loved it, the physicians, everyone's saying it's going to be great things, but at the end of the day, it hasn't helped a whole lot with getting new therapies to the patients. So I would just caution you on running out to try to pursue those pathways. Similar approach on devices. The device path is not getting easier, it's getting more challenging. Today, the average regenerative medicine device takes 7 years before you're in the market to sell it. And hopefully, the accelerated pathway in the US is the expedited access pathway is going to help that. And we'll see, it's brand new this year, and we'll see if the data sort of bears that out. So these are the number of approvals and submissions that have gone into the FDA over the last 3.5 years for the different programs. You can see that orphan drug and breakthrough are two areas, and fast track, which I don't think gets you a whole lot, but are most of the area where everyone is submitting. But and depending upon what your target is, it also is going to depend upon your success in getting those designations. Breakthrough therapies as a whole, though, of the 52 that have been approved, come to market, 25 have been in cancer. So there's a real big bias towards cancer in the data. And that may be because we've had a lot of breakthroughs recently. I don't know. I'm not that far into it at this point yet to decipher the differences. So quickly, what are some companies that have taken advantage of this, and what have they meant? Well, this is one product I was involved in that I co-developed, which is a device and a cell therapy combination for critical limb ischemia that takes the patient's own stem cells out, processes them, purifies them with a sophisticated bedside device that has onboard electronics, chooses the right stem cells into a dosing bag, and then that dosing bag is actually, the QC happens right in the operating room with the physician. So the physician's under this whole control. Process takes about 90 minutes from door to door, and the patient ends up getting a treatment for critical limb ischemia. Their life expectancy for this patient class is about 12 to 18 months. So pretty low risk for the FDA to get too concerned about looking at safety. But when we went to them, what was interesting, we only had phase 1 data, which was a 12-month endpoint. 80% of those patients that should have, essentially 60% of them should have had their leg amputated or been dead. 80% of them still had their leg and were alive at the 12-month endpoint. FDA got very excited about this, unexpected results. And they said, yes, we will put you into a pivotal trial off of this data. And we got all excited, and then came all of the other sides to the FDA, which were, oh, by the way, you've got to have a QC lab in the operating room, and you've got to test everything and prove what you're giving back to the patient. So we went from having the therapy now to back designing diagnostics. So we were truly not only a combination product of needing the device which aspirated the stem cells, processed the stem cells, and a new device for delivering them so they were healthy when they went to the patient. We now needed to become a diagnostic company and build all of these rapid diagnostics on board. So you talk about a very quick learning curve. Good news out of that is the FDA worked with us, and we didn't have to meet all of the IVD standards on those to proceed to the pivotal trial. And I think that the reason for that is because they were autologous, the safety profile was pretty well understood. I also took the technology to CMS and got them to agree to actually pay for the pivotal trial for the patients and the device costs. And so that essentially covered about half of a very expensive trial program. And so I think the take-home message on that was there are many things you have to learn on the fly in these accelerated programs. There are a lot of bumps that are going to come, but at the end of the day, we didn't accelerate our timeline, but what I think we did do was cut off probably some added on time at the end because FDA worked with us up front. Two other examples quickly. Juno, I think someone presented this earlier in the morning, which is a CAR T-based program that has been designated breakthrough therapy. I think this is one example of a therapy that's probably going to move through the regulatory cycle faster than the normal timeline. And these patients are going to die without this, and so I think everybody wants it to work. The other interesting point, though, to the Juno story was they took a lot of investment, they're a public company, and patients die in clinical trials, and terminal patients die. So the other side to, the fun side of funding is that you have to deal with investors who don't understand that you're not going to save everyone. And you may have elements of an accelerated pathway that were not well planned up front because you are accelerating. And Juno ran into that with some of their protocols. And so they're stumbling a bit with it now, but I think they will get back on track. And then finally, a technology that has been granted expedited access, this brand new one for devices, which is an autologous cell product, again, done right in the hospital for wound care and burns, where you take a dermal plug, you process it right at the bedside, and you get basically a heterogeneous cell population with a lot of factors involved, and you spray that over the burn wound with really phenomenal clinical results. And because it's autologous, it got into this accelerated pathway. Their stock was all the way, I think, sub 10 cents per share. Very exciting now, doubled the share price, and I think this is going to be probably standard of care very, very quickly in burns and probably in venous ulcers. So another company that I think has done the expedited or the accelerated pathway very, very carefully and properly. So what do we know, though, and why should we head down an accelerated pathway? Well, this is a very thorough study that McKinsey did. McKinsey went back and said, is getting to market first important? Is getting to market first advantageous? And who that gets to market first actually gets the advantages? Well, what McKinsey found off of all of these companies that took accelerated approaches was first to market has about a 6% market share advantage over a 10-year time frame if you're a big pharma. That advantage doesn't hold up if you're small. Reason is because it's very expensive to launch a therapy or a device into the marketplace. They also found that not all accelerated products are equal. Injectables tended to get higher market shares faster than did small molecules or devices. So another interesting data point. It's probably part of the perception. And then finally, specialty illnesses, which I think most of us in here are focused on. Rare diseases, highly specialized, tended to get the most market share over that 10-year time period by being first to market. So you have to think about the pros and the cons. What do I think are the risks of going down an accelerated pathway? Well, one of them is that you will get a full rejection. I showed you 400 and some applications just in breakthrough therapy alone, and only 100 and some of them were granted. Well, if you are living hand to mouth as a small company, underfunded, and you get breakthrough therapy designation, I think you will do very well for getting additional capital into your company. If you get denied, you may be headed, straight away for the graveyard. So those are the risks that your organization needs to think about is what would a rejection do? Am I better off to not apply for this too early on, have much more data to convince the FDA of, and try to find my funding elsewhere? So I think in summary of that is that accelerated approval pathways are not a guarantee that your therapy is going to get to the market. It's a guarantee the FDA is going to be there with you all the way through the process. I have seen accelerated therapies even with FDA being there. FDA designs your protocol. FDA helps you design your statistical plan, on and on and on, and you get through your clinical trial, you meet your primary endpoint, and you get into a panel, and they don't approve you. So it's just not a guarantee. It's helpful, but it's not a guarantee that an accelerated pathway is going to get you to marketing. And then I think, really is this marginal improvement on the 10-year market share. I think the McKinsey data shows, straight away that the risk may be higher than the long-term reward for small companies in particular. So with that, I will kind of, leave with the final bullet point to what I don't think any of us know how to solve, and that is that the payers simply do not see the return for accelerated pathways, and they're typically not in the mood right now to pay for them. Their ratios are off, so the cost for the therapy, and I think, hepatitis C has been another data point this year that we've seen. It's a cure. The Gilead drug is a cure for hepatitis C, and most patients are denied access to it because of the cost. And that has definitely been a cold shower for the investment community as well as biotech, because no one would have ever thought this. We would have thought the whole goal was to have a cure. And once you had the cure, everything would work well. But the end of the day is we can't afford it. So I would think a lot about how your product's going to be reimbursed. And with that, I will end.